I used to think marriage was a long conversation, one that never truly ended. You argue, you laugh, you forgive, then you start again. But somewhere along the line, our words stopped finding each other. They just floated in the air, unanswered. Her name was Emily. We'd been married 12 years, built a home on the outskirts of Portland, a small house with cedar walls and too many memories hanging in its corners. In the beginning, she was warmth itself, the kind of person who'd hum while making coffee, who'd wait up for me no matter how late my shifts ran. Then something shifted. Not all at once, but slowly, like the way autumn sneaks into summer. Her laughter grew shorter, her silences longer. She started sleeping facing the wall. I remember one night in February, rain was sliding down the window, the kind of soft drizzle that makes you crave closeness. I reached out to hold her, gently tracing the outline of her shoulder beneath the blanket. She flinched, not from fear, but from annoyance. "Don't," she said quietly. That word hung in the dark, heavier than it should have been. I withdrew my hand and lay there, staring at the ceiling fan turning its slow, useless circles. I wanted to ask what went wrong. I wanted to fix it. But her breathing evened out, and I knew she'd rather sleep than speak. The next morning, she moved around the kitchen like I wasn't there. The toast burned. She didn't notice. When I kissed her on the cheek before leaving for work, her skin felt cold. Days turned into weeks. Every attempt to reconnect met a wall of polite indifference. I bought her favorite flowers, she placed them on the counter, didn't even unwrap them. I planned a weekend getaway, she said she had too much work. Then one evening, I asked her directly, "Emily, are we okay?" She didn't look up from her phone. "We're fine, Daniel. You just overthink everything." Her voice was calm, but her eyes were somewhere else, somewhere far from me. That night, I found myself sitting alone on the back porch, a glass of whiskey sweating in my hand. I stared out at the garden she once loved tending. The soil was dry, the flowers dying. Like us. The next day, something inside me shifted. I stopped trying. I matched her silence with my own. I came home late, ate dinner alone, and learned what loneliness really sounds like, the echo of your own fork against a plate. Then came the night that ended everything. It was cold, early spring. I'd spent the day clearing out the attic, finding old photos, our honeymoon, her smile so wide it made my chest ache. I thought maybe, if she saw them again, she'd remember what we used to be. When she came home, I showed her one, the picture of us on Cannon Beach, holding hands, the sky turning pink behind us. She glanced at it, barely a second, then said flatly, "Daniel, stop living in the past." "I'm not," I said. "I'm trying to understand where we lost it." She exhaled, like she'd been holding in her patience for years. Then she said it. "If you want warmth, Daniel, go find it elsewhere." The words cut clean. No shouting, no tears. Just cold honesty. I stood there, unable to move. She walked past me, into the bedroom, shutting the door softly behind her, the quietest ending I'd ever heard. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table, the clock ticking loud enough to drown my thoughts. The phrase repeated in my head, "Go find it elsewhere." At dawn, I made coffee, watched the steam curl like ghosts from the mug. I opened the drawer, pulled out the envelope that had been waiting there for months, the divorce papers she'd quietly suggested but never signed. I signed them. My hand didn't tremble. When the first streak of light touched the windowsill, I placed the papers on her nightstand. She was asleep, her face peaceful, almost innocent. I didn't leave a note. There was nothing left to explain. I packed a single suitcase, grabbed my coat, and walked out the door. The morning air bit at my face, sharp and clean. For the first time in months, I felt something, not warmth, but clarity. As I drove away, the house disappeared in the rearview mirror, smaller with every mile. I thought of all the times I'd waited for her to come back to me, and realized she never really had to leave, she'd been gone long before I noticed. The road stretched endlessly ahead, the sky turning gold as the sun climbed. I didn't have a destination in mind, just the need to keep moving. Every mile between me and that house felt like air entering lungs that hadn't drawn a full breath in years. By noon, I found myself in a small coastal town 2 hours south. The kind of place where no one knows your story and no one asks. I checked into a quiet motel facing the ocean. The clerk didn't even look up when I handed him my ID, just slid a key across the counter. Room 12. Inside, the room smelled faintly of salt and old wood. I dropped my bag and walked straight to the balcony. The sea was restless, waves crashing like they had something to prove. I stood there, watching the horizon, thinking how something could be so chaotic yet still beautiful. Maybe that was love, constant motion, rarely peaceful, but impossible to ignore. For the next few days, I existed on autopilot. Coffee at dawn, long walks on the sand, dinners of nothing more than soup from the diner next door. I didn't talk much. Didn't need to. Silence wasn't heavy anymore, it was healing. But nights were harder. That's when memories crept in, her laughter echoing from another lifetime, the way she'd once traced circles on my palm when we watched movies. I'd close my eyes, and for a moment, pretend it was still us. Then I'd open them and remember, she told me to find warmth elsewhere. On the fifth morning, I walked into a small bookstore near the pier. It was the kind of place where time felt slower. Behind the counter sat an older man with a beard white as sea foam, reading a battered copy of East of Eden. He looked up. "You look like someone who needs stories more than sleep." I smiled faintly. "You might be right." He handed me a notebook instead. "Sometimes the story you need isn't written yet." That night, I started writing, not for her, not for closure, but for myself. I wrote about the first time I met Emily at a campus cafe, her hair catching the afternoon sun. I wrote about our wedding, the apartment we painted ourselves, the first fight that lasted 3 days. I wrote until my hand cramped and my eyes blurred. When I finished, the clock read 3:42 a.m. I slept with the notebook open beside me. Weeks passed. I began noticing small things again, how the morning air smelled of salt and coffee, how strangers smiled without reason. One evening, I helped a woman at the diner whose car had stalled. Her name was Claire, a nurse who'd recently moved to town. She thanked me with a soft grin that didn't ask for anything in return. We spoke a few times after that, nothing more. It wasn't love, not even close. It was human connection, gentle, unforced. The kind that reminds you you're still alive. One evening, as we shared a coffee outside the diner, she asked, "What brought you here?" I hesitated. "A sentence." She tilted her head. "A sentence?" She told me, if I wanted warmth, I should go find it elsewhere. So, I did. Claire didn't laugh. She just nodded, the kind of nod that said she understood more than words could explain. After she left, I walked down to the beach. The tide was low, the air cool. I thought about Emily, whether she'd woken to the papers, whether she'd felt relief or regret. Maybe both. I realized it didn't matter anymore. Some stories don't end with closure, they end when you stop rereading them. Months later, a letter arrived at the motel. No return address, just my name written in familiar cursive. I knew before I opened it. "Daniel," it began. "I found the papers. I suppose I always knew you'd be the one to finish what I couldn't start. I've been trying to convince myself I did the right thing, but silence echoes differently when you're the only one hearing it. I hope you found warmth. You deserved it." There was no apology. Just honesty, the same cold clarity she'd always had. I folded the letter once and slipped it into the notebook where my story began. That night, I stood by the ocean again. The wind was sharp, but it didn't sting. I thought about how warmth isn't always found in another person. Sometimes, it's in the act of walking away, of reclaiming the parts of yourself you gave away too easily. I closed my eyes and whispered to the wind, "You were right, Emily. I did find it elsewhere, just not where you thought." When I opened them, the horizon was endless, painted with streaks of gold and gray. The waves kept rolling, tireless, unstoppable. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to look back.